Most people, no matter where they are from, have imagined what it would be like to live a life of a royal. A life where you could, at the drop of a hat, get anything you wanted. Any request you make is met with a swift response, and you're never told no, because of who you are. The men and women you surround yourself with all answer to your family, and you hold their livelihoods in the palm of your hand. A firm stands behind you, whose entire purpose is to make you look as good as possible, and to make sure the public loves you, no matter what it is you're doing. You've never had to hold down a proper job. Instead, all of your money is given to you because of who you are. The public's taxes are funneled to your wallet to use however you see fit. All you have to do is follow some carefully laid plans made by other people, which involves traveling around the world and meeting the heads of nations. You, by birthright, are placed on a pedestal and treated as if you've contributed something fantastic to the world. Coming into that kind of power is something most people work hard for. Self-made millionaires often work hard for the luxury of no longer having to work hard, with the goal of getting that beautiful, seemingly stress-free existence. They spend their lives inventing new technologies, pushing the boundaries on what is possible, and revolutionizing the world. Because of them, technology advances, life becomes easier, and by the time the world takes notice, their impact on the world is evident. Their struggles have, hopefully, grounded them to reality. But as the subject of today's video has known no struggles, that is obviously not the case. Welcome back to another episode of Dreading, or if this is your first time here, welcome. Today, we are going to be covering the case of Prince Andrew, and the various ways his scandal was pushed down by the media. In that regard, this case is shockingly similar to the Cosby case, which we talked about previously. Based on how old media functioned, people like Cosby and Andrew were made aware of all the press that was going to be printed about them before it was, and could kill the stories before they came out. In some cases, when those stories would still make their way to print, they would be pushed down and reduced to a byline on page 18, meaning the vast majority of people would be none the wiser. But because of social media, independent reporters and people refusing to stay quiet, we're seeing these years-old cases brought to the forefront again. This video was also voted on by our patrons, and if you would like to watch videos before they go public, consider checking out my Patreon linked below. Today's video is entirely unmonetized, and has been previously approved by lawyers due to continuing legal threats. Andrew Albert Christian Edward was born February 19, 1960. In Buckingham Palace. He was the third child to Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip, but the second son, and from the moment he was born, he was thrust into the spotlight. Everyone in England was immediately aware of who he was, and he would grow quite accustomed to being catered to in his life. His early education was done at Buckingham Palace. When he was 8 years old, Andrew would go to Heatherdown Preparatory School in Berkshire. At 13, he went to Gordonston School in Scotland. Andrew would talk about his time in school fondly, stating that he was quite popular, and everyone in the class seemed to like him. He said this was due in part to the fact that he was royal, and he felt like many people tried to get on his good side because of that. He maintained that he never let this kind of attention and admiration from his peers change him, and that he treated everyone with the same amount of respect. However, his peers thought differently. Classmates and teachers would describe Andrew as being big-headed and arrogant, believing himself to be smarter than he really was. He had a need to try and correct people, and often did so in a demeaning and rude way. He was the type of person who wanted to debate his teachers, thinking he could outwit them, even when he didn't know what he was talking about. In class, he would openly scoff at certain lessons, telling his peers that his tutors had taught him differently. His classmates gave him the nickname the Sniggerer, because he was constantly giggling to himself over some kind of joke that he made. Notably, it seemed that no one else found him to be very funny. But in Andrew's perception of events, he was wildly popular, and everyone had enjoyed their time with him. This altered perception of events would follow him throughout his life, with him believing himself to be well-liked, honorable, and just too good of a guy, when others found him to be detestable. After Andrew was finished with school, he promptly joined the Royal Navy. This choice had been made for him by the firm behind the royal family, as it was seen as positive PR to have a member of the family in active service. Their service would be seen as them doing their duty as a royal, and going above and beyond for their country. Andrew undertook the Royal Marine Green Beret course and learned how to fly a Gazelle and Sea King helicopters. According to his own biography, in 1982, he joined the aircraft carrier HMS Invincible and saw frontline action during the Falklands War, flying anti-submarine and anti-surface warfare missions and search and rescue operations. In 1983, he transferred to Lynx helicopters. In 1984 through 91, saw service aboard HMS Brazen as a flight pilot and as a flight commander on HMS Campbelltown. He became a lieutenant commander in 1992 and commanded a minehunter HMS Cottesmore. In 1995, he was senior pilot of 815 Naval Air Squadron, and in 2001 finished his naval career as a commander in the Ministry of Defense in London. He's colonel-in-chief of a number of regiments, including Canadian regiments. But left out of any royal-affiliated and approved news articles is the fact that during his service, Andrew became closely acquainted and may have dated Ghislaine Maxwell. Ghislaine Maxwell deserves and will eventually get a full video of her own, but we'll only be covering Ghislaine today in regards to how she's involved with Prince Andrew. A video on Ghislaine will be forthcoming, as I am currently working on it, but as you can imagine, it involves a significant amount of research and fact-checking, so all I can say is that it is in the works. Ghislaine Noel Marion Maxwell was born December 25, 1961, to parents Robert and Elizabeth Maxwell. Much like Andrew, Ghislaine was born into wealth and status, her father being the owner of the Mirror Group newspapers, which published the Daily Mirror, Sunday People, Sunday Scottish Mail, and more. Alongside that, Robert Maxwell was a member of Parliament, suspected spy and fraudster, and as such, was an incredibly well-connected man. Everyone knew who he was, including the royal family, who relied on Maxwell's publishing to print favorable articles about them. The royal family spent significant time, money, and energy getting print media on their side. That way they could always look a certain way in the press, and that was something that Robert Maxwell knew how to exploit. The Maxwells lived in Headington Hill Hall, a 53-room mansion in Oxford, which is now used by Oxford University. The home is palatial, and the Maxwell family lived like royalty. Ghislaine was incredibly close with her father, and was publicly known to be his favorite out of his 9 children. He named his yacht Lady Ghislaine after her, had her work directly under him, and brought her to the most exclusive social events in London. Ghislaine learned directly how to network with powerful people from her father, and he taught her how to get what she needed from them. Information was power, and if you had information on someone, you could get them to do anything. When Ghislaine was in college, still working with her father, she would come to meet Prince Andrew. Andrew himself would claim that he met Maxwell when she was an undergraduate at Oxford University, likely through her father's connection, but no further details have ever been given as to how they met. When exactly Ghislaine and Andrew met is up for debate, as they both stated multiple different stories as to how it came to be. Shortly after Ghislaine met Prince Andrew, Robert Maxwell would die under slightly suspicious circumstances. His body was found floating in the Atlantic Ocean, and it was reported he simply had fallen overboard. The death was ruled accidental. However, it was later found that he had stolen hundreds of millions of pounds from the company he ran, and he was in debt to multiple people, businesses, and banks, leading people to speculate that his death had been an orchestrated hit. Following her father's untimely demise, Ghislaine's role changed. She had been working diligently under her father's tutelage, and without him, she came into her own. Ghislaine became a socialite in the London scene, constantly photographed, going to the most expensive clubs and parties. Ghislaine was reported to take the death incredibly hard. She was extremely close with her father, and it would be reported in the Mail on Sunday that Prince Andrew was extremely comforting and compassionate during her time of need. But through her father's death, Ghislaine became exceptionally close to Prince Andrew, and it was said that his entire personality changed because of it. The pair would be seen hanging out more and more, with their first public sighting being a Mar-a-Lago tennis tournament in 2001. This tennis event would be erroneously cited as the first time Ghislaine and Andrew met, according to his wife, Sarah Ferguson. After this false introduction, Andrew and Maxwell traveled together 8 times over the rest of 2000 and were photographed at various London night spots. The tabloids reported that Andrew's partying and wild behavior was a symptom of the people he was around, namely Ghislaine. She was a party girl socialite, and being seen in her company was bad publicity. The tabloids babied the grown man, reporting that Andrew was an overall good man, but was a poor judge of character, and had a tendency to trust the wrong people. They portrayed him as being too trusting to know right from wrong, and stated that his family was trying to reel him back in from some of the more unruly behavior he was exhibiting. They also claimed he was reeling from his divorce, and was acting out because of it, though neither of those claims seems to be true. Eventually, Ghislaine would move back to New York, and that was where she would meet Jeffrey Epstein, who will be focused on heavily in a separate video. Jeffrey Epstein, like Ghislaine, seemed to get by knowing the right people and running in the correct circles. He was constantly in the company of wealthy men and women, as well as politicians and celebrities, and when asked, would state that he was a highly successful financier, but that of course was just a front for his real job, trafficking women and children into sex slavery. After Ghislaine and Jeffrey met, they would begin working together to abuse women and children. Ghislaine provided a much-needed service to Jeffrey, and according to an interview he would give in 2003, Jeffrey would state that Ghislaine organized the majority of his life. This involved finding young girls, especially under the age of 14, who would come to work for Jeffrey in his estates. These girls would initially be told that they would be working as anything from servers, spa attendants, or maids in the home, and over time would be groomed into providing sexual services. This reportedly included classes in which these minors were shown by Ghislaine what Jeffrey enjoyed during oral sex. But Ghislaine and Jeffrey didn't simply abuse these minors behind closed doors without anyone knowing. They were incredibly enterprising people and allowed for anyone who visited their properties to take part in the sexual abuse of these children. Ghislaine had been taught by her father that with the right piece of information, you could get a powerful person to do whatever you wanted, and so the pair kept highly detailed logs of the people who would use their services. Despite a large-scale crime being committed, the pair would collect proof of the sexual abuse that was occurring, including photos, and would use these items as a sort of insurance. I'll go over this in further detail on my separate video on Maxwell and Epstein. Andrew would consider himself incredibly close to both Maxwell and Epstein, inviting them to formal palace events. They were so close, in fact, that Prince Andrew would go ahead and throw Ghislaine a surprise birthday party at Sandringham, which is the Queen's estate in Norfolk. He even chose to stand by Epstein after he had been charged with and investigated for sexually abusing a 14-year-old. Allegations against Jeffrey Epstein started surfacing in 2005 when the parents of a 14-year-old girl told police in Florida that Epstein had molested their daughter at his Palm Beach home. But despite being charged 1 month prior with procuring a minor for prostitution and solicitation of a prostitute, Prince Andrew would invite his dear friend Epstein to a masked ball at Windsor Castle to celebrate the 18th birthday of Princess Beatrice, his daughter. The invitation, he claimed, was done before he was aware of the charges being brought against his friend, and had he have known, he would have never allowed Epstein to be seen in the castle. But it was through Epstein and Maxwell that Andrew met Virginia Roberts Giuffre. Virginia Louise Roberts was born in Sacramento, California on August 9, 1983, and from the start of her life, she was subjected to horrendous abuse. Her family moved to Florida when she was just 4, and shortly thereafter, she was molested by a close family friend. To escape that abuse, she would end up running away from home and placed in foster care, but every solution seemed to make matters worse. By the time she was 14, she was taken in and sexually abused by Ron Eppinger, a known sex trafficker. Ron kept Virginia for 6 months, abusing her as well as other women and children until the FBI raided his home and business, charging him with alien smuggling for prostitution, interstate travel for prostitution, and money laundering. After a horrific start to her life, Virginia would be reunited with her father, who worked as a maintenance manager at Mar-a-Lago. Virginia would spend much of her free time at the club and would go on to get a job as a spa attendant there. It was there that Ghislaine would end up scouting the young girl for Epstein. According to Virginia's testimony, Ghislaine approached her and asked her about the book she was reading, which was about massage therapy. Virginia told the older woman that she was reading it in order to potentially become a masseuse at the club, and Ghislaine pounced on that information. According to Virginia, Ghislaine told her that she knew a man who was looking for a traveling masseuse to work for him, and that he would be willing to pay top dollar for one. She boasted about how rich the man was, how she could see the world, and how great the position would be for her. Virginia thought that the offer was too good to be true, partially because she wasn't technically a massage therapist, but Ghislaine told her that it didn't matter, as she would get on-the-job training. Ghislaine, being a beautiful, well-spoken, and obviously wealthy woman, immediately put Virginia at ease with the proposition. In Virginia's mind, and the mind of most of the other young girls that they would traffic, there was no way a woman like Ghislaine would get herself involved in sex trafficking, but they were wrong. Almost immediately, Virginia was being abused again, this time by Epstein. He informed Virginia they were virtually untouchable by the law. In an interview Virginia would give to NBC News in 2019, she stated, "Jeffrey and Ghislaine's way of keeping us under his thumb, under his rule, under his control, were invisible chains, and it was that constant. We own the police. You can't run. You can't tell anybody. We'll never be held accountable for this. They didn't just put a gun to your head and tell you, if you don't do this, you're gonna die. They used very quaint threats. One of the scariest threats that I ever had was they told me that they knew where my little brother goes to school, and if I don't do what they say, I know the outcome." And it was while Virginia was put in this position that she would meet and be forced into sex with Prince Andrew. Virginia would state that she had sex with Prince Andrew on 3 occasions, once in London in 2001, once in New York, and one other time on Little St. James, the island that Jeffrey Epstein owned, which at the time she was just 17 years old. On the first occasion, Jeffrey and Ghislaine took her to Tramp nightclub and introduced her to the prince. prince. Virginia had hoped that the prince would see what was going on and bring a stop to it, as he was an incredibly powerful person, but it quickly became clear that he was close to Epstein and Maxwell, and looking to exploit her. They danced at the club, then the group retired to Maxwell's home, where she instructed Virginia to, quote, "do for Prince Andrew what you do for Epstein." A photo of the pair was taken that night in Maxwell's home, adding credibility to what Virginia has claimed. Court documents would detail that the second encounter happened at Epstein's New York mansion, and the third occurred on his island during an orgy. Another woman would be included in these claims, that being Johanna Schoberg, who claimed that Andrew had molested her as well, groping her breast while she sat on a couch. Flight logs also showed that Andrew had been present on the other two occasions. The encounters all occurred in 2001, but it wouldn't come to light until nearly 14 years later. In the meantime, Andrew, Jeffrey, and Ghislaine would continue to be seen together, traveling around the world and in the company of much younger women. However, their friendship was tested when Jeffrey would eventually plead guilty to the charges of procuring a minor for prostitution and solicitation of a prostitute. The charges were a, quote, bad look for the financier, according to Andrew. Jeffrey served almost 13 months in custody with extensive work release, which meant that he could leave the prison for up to 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. Epstein's cell door was left unlocked, and he had access to the attorney room where a television was installed for him before he was moved to the Stockade's previously unstaffed infirmary. The sheriff's office received $128,000 from Epstein's nonprofit to pay for the costs of extra services, not including the permit deputies who were charged with monitoring him when he was in the prison. These deputies didn't work for the jail, but rather were employees of Epstein. They were required to wear suits and checked in welcomed guests at the front desk, and when he left prison during the day, he was also allowed to use his own personal driver to take him wherever he needed to go. His sentence was practically a vacation for him, and his cell was turned into a luxury suite for his stay. After his prison stay was over, Prince Andrew would travel to see Epstein in 2010, staying in his New York home. The pair would be seen and photographed in Central Park, an action that Andrew would claim was planned by Epstein. Andrew would claim that it was on this visit that he told Epstein he could no longer be his friend. However, despite the friendship ending, Andrew's ex-wife, Sarah Ferguson, would allege that in 2011, Andrew arranged for Epstein to pay off over 15,000 pounds of her debt, an action that seemed to be incredibly friendly. Over time, more information revolving around Epstein and Maxwell's dealings began to come out, and more women were given the opportunity to speak out about what happened to them. But as more people became aware of the disgusting things the pair had done together, people began to note the men and women who had been around them, most pressingly, Prince Andrew. In 2011, Andrew's role as trade envoy was terminated, citing his relationship with the pedophile. But the firm behind the royal family told the press that Andrew had ended his friendship with Epstein. They claimed that he had been casual friends with Jeffrey, nothing more, and he was absolutely appalled to hear about what Epstein had gotten up to. But the public's demand for the truth only grew with time. Following Epstein's arrest and subsequent death in 2019, the public demand for accountability and answers was at an all-time high. In the past cases of controversy, before the era of social media and independent reporting, all the palace had to do was push negative stories off of the front page and wait out the public. Bad press would die with time, and eventually people would just forget. But with the rise of Twitter, social media, and the 24-hour news cycle, it was no longer possible to simply ignore the outcry. Their position was made even worse when, following Epstein's death, court documents from 2016 were released, formally naming Prince Andrew as taking part in Epstein's sex ring. Buckingham Palace defended Andrew in a statement at the time, denying that he ever had any involvement with Virginia. They stated, "It is emphatically denied that the Duke of York had any form of sexual contact or relationship with Virginia Roberts. Any claim to the contrary is false and without foundation." But that was not enough. Following the formal accusation, the palace would have Prince Andrew sit down for an interview with Emily Maitlis, a move that would show him as the small, idiotic man he had always been. Before we begin, it's imperative that you understand how Andrew believed this interview to have gone. Andrew thought this interview not only cleared his name from the allegations that had been brought against him, he believed that it was bound to improve his image. He felt as if he came across incredibly well, and even took the Newsnight team for a tour of the palace directly after, which was completely unplanned. It's reminiscent of his classmates' description of how he was in school. He thought he was popular, smart, and well-liked, even though that was not the case. As you watch this car crash, remember that he is under the belief that he's doing well, also that everyone is listening to him, and that he will be seen as the victim of false allegations in all of this.
We've come to Buckingham Palace in highly unusual circumstances. Normally, we'd be discussing your work, your duty. We'll come on to that. But today, you've chosen to speak out for the first time. Why have you decided to talk now?
Because there is no good time to talk about Mr. Epstein and all things associated. We've been talking to Newsnight for about 6 months about doing something around the work that I was doing. And unfortunately, we've just not been able to fit it into either your schedule or my schedule until now. And actually, it's a very good opportunity, and I'm delighted to be able to see you today.
This interview would have been the product of months of coaching, all with the result of attempting to make Prince Andrew appear as forthright and honest as possible. However, from the outset, even when he talks about Epstein, he tries to counter that by discussing how this interview was originally supposed to be covering some of his charitable works, which is an ineffective counter, as it doesn't matter if you've given all of your time, energy, and money to helping the needy if you've sexually exploited minors and helped facilitate a sex trafficking ring.
As you say, all of this goes back to your friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. How did you first become friends? How did you meet?
Well, I met through his girlfriend back in 1999, and I'd known her since she was at university in the UK.
While I've already covered this in the introduction to this video, it's again important to notate how different this statement is compared to the one that had been told to the media prior to this interview. In all the records that I found, predating the interview, the agreed upon story, coming directly from the palace, was that Andrew met Ghislaine at the tail end of the 90s, and was introduced to her by his ex-wife. Him asserting that he had known her up to a decade longer is significant.
And it would be, to some extent, a stretch to say that as it were, we were close friends. I mean, we were friends because of other people. And I had a lot of opportunity to go to the United States, but I didn't have much time with him. I suppose I saw him once or twice a year, perhaps maybe maximum of 3 times a year. And quite often, if I was in the United States and doing things, and if he wasn't there, he would say, well, why don't you come and use my houses? So I said, that's very kind, thank you very much indeed. But it would be a considerable stretch to say that he was a very, very close friend. But he had the most extraordinary ability to bring extraordinary people together. And that's the bit that I remember, is going to the dinner parties where you would meet academics, politicians, people from the United Nations. I mean, it was a cosmopolitan group of what I would describe as US eminence.
You could also describe this group as, at the very least, being willing to turn a blind eye to sex trafficking and the abuse of women and children, which is not very cosmopolitan. Andrew going out of his way to declare that he wouldn't call himself a very, very close friend of Epstein, something that the interviewer hadn't alleged, but still asserting that a convicted sex offender had great qualities, is misguided. This statement is also factually inaccurate, as records would show that he would spend weeks visiting Epstein, and at one time, Maxwell stayed at Buckingham Palace so frequently that many staffers believed she was in a relationship with Andrew. These are not actions of casual acquaintances.
But was that his appeal then? Was that what you... Because you were perceived by the public as being the party prince. Was that something you shared?
Well, I think that's also a bit of a stretch. I don't know why I've collected that title, because I never have really partied. I was single for quite a long time, in the early 80s. But then after I got married, I was very happy. And I've never really felt the need to go and party. And certainly going to Jeffrey's was not about partying. Absolutely not.
You said you weren't very good friends, but would you describe him as a good friend? Did you trust him?
Yes, I think I probably did. But again, I mean, I don't go into a friendship looking for the wrong thing, if you understand what I mean. I'm an engaging person. I want to be able to engage. I want to find out. I want to learn. And so you have to remember that I was transitioning out of the Navy at the time. And in the transition, I wanted to find out more about what was going on, because in the Navy, it's a pretty isolated business because you're out at sea the whole time. And I was going to become the Special Representative for International Trade and Investment. So I wanted to know more about what was going on in the international business world. And so that was another reason for going there. And the opportunities that I had to go to Wall Street and other places to learn whilst I was there were absolutely vital.
He was your guest as well. In 2000, Epstein was a guest at Windsor Castle and at Sandringham. He was brought right into the heart of the royal family at your invitation.
But certainly at my invitation, not at the royal family's invitation. But remember that it was his girlfriend that was the key element in this.
While at the time, it might have seemed imperative to state that he was closer friends with Ghislaine than he was with Epstein, in order to get a certain amount of distance from the accusations. Ghislaine is also a convicted sex offender who helped establish and run a sex trafficking ring. The only difference between Jeffrey and Ghislaine is at the time, she had not been convicted.
He was the, as it were, plus one to some extent in that aspect.
Am I right in thinking you threw a birthday party for Epstein's girlfriend, Ghislaine Maxwell, at Sandringham?
No, it was a shooting weekend.
A shooting weekend?
Just a straightforward shooting weekend.
But during these times that he was a guest at Windsor Castle, at Sandringham, the shooting weekend, we now know that he was and had been procuring young girls for sex trafficking.
We now know that. At the time, there was no indication to me or anybody else that that was what he was doing. And certainly, when I saw him either in the United States, when I saw him in the United States, or when I was staying in his houses in the United States, there was no indication, absolutely no indication. And if there was, you have to remember that at the time, I was patron of the NSPCC's Full Stop campaign, so I was close up with what was going on in those time about getting rid of abuse to children. So I knew what the things were to look for, but I never saw them.
So you would have made that connection because you stayed with him, you were a visitor, a guest on many occasions at his homes, and nothing struck you as suspicious?
Nothing.
During that whole time?
Nothing.
Just for the record, you've been on his private plane?
Yes.
You've been to stay on his private island?
Yes.
You've stayed at his home in Palm Beach?
Yes.
You visited Ghislaine Maxwell's house in Belgravia in London?
Yes.
So in 2006, in May, an arrest warrant was issued for Epstein for sexual assault of a minor.
Yes.
In July, he was invited to Windsor Castle to your daughter Princess Beatrice's 18th birthday. Why would you do that?
Because I was asking Ghislaine. But even so, at the time, I don't think certainly I wasn't aware when the invitation was issued what was going on in the United States. And I wasn't aware until the media picked up on it, because he never said anything about it.
He never discussed with you the fact that an arrest warrant had been issued? No. So he came to that party knowing police were investigating him?
Well, I'm not quite sure whether was it police that were. I don't know. You see, this is the problem.
It was the Palm Beach police at the time.
But I mean, I'm afraid, you see, this is the problem, is that an awful lot of this was going on in the United States, and I wasn't a party to it, and I knew nothing about it.
For any normal person, the idea that a friend of theirs could also be a sexually depraved monster is terrifying. The amount of guilt one one would have over knowing this person for decades and not seeing the signs would usually have a person thinking back on all the times they had shared together, trying to see if there was some indication, something that they could do. There would be a significant amount of remorse, along with a sense of some responsibility. But Andrew is completely blasé, as if this is a small matter that is almost an annoyance. Andrew invited not one but two pedophiles to his daughter's 18th birthday. That fact alone should be eating away at him. There should be some sort of remorse or reflection on his part, something that lets the world know that he understands how depraved this is, but there's nothing. His continual headshakes and general unfazed demeanor doesn't fit the scenario, and his repeated statements that he didn't know, as if it wasn't his responsibility to know, is incredibly alarming.
In 2008, he was convicted of soliciting and procuring a minor for prostitution. He was jailed. This was your friend. How did you feel about it?
Well, I ceased contact with him after I was aware that he was under investigation. And that was later on in 2006. And I wasn't in touch with him again until 2010. So it was one of those things that if somebody's going through that sort of thing, well, I'm terribly sorry, I can't be.
So no contact?
No contact.
When he was serving time, there was no call, no letter, nothing there?
No.
We have no way of knowing if this is true or not, as the jail where Epstein was housed for the 13 months destroyed all the records pertaining to him, including call logs, letters, and the like.
He was released in July. Within months, by December of 2010, you went to stay with him at his New York mansion. Why? Why were you staying with a convicted sex offender?
Right. I have always, ever since this has happened, and since this has become, as it were, public knowledge that I was there, I've questioned myself as to why did I go, what was I doing, and was it the right thing to do? Now, I went there with the sole purpose of saying to him that because he had been convicted, it was inappropriate for us to be seen together. And I had a number of people counsel me in both directions, either to go and see him or not to go and see him. And I took the judgment call that because this was serious, and I felt that doing it over the telephone was the chicken's way of doing it. I had to go and see him and talk to him. And I went to see him, and I was doing a number of other things in New York at the time, and we had an opportunity to go for a walk in the park, and that was the conversation, coincidentally, that was photographed, which was when I said to him, I said, look, because of what has happened, I don't think it is appropriate that we should remain in contact. And by mutual agreement during that walk in the park, we decided that we would part company, and I left, I think it was the next day. And to this day, I never had any contact with him from that day forward.
Notice now he states that he's only reflected since this fact has become, quote, public knowledge. Had this trip never been made public, he would have likely denied its occurrence, stating he immediately cut contact after Epstein was charged, and he left the situation at that. He, clear as day, only has remorse about spending a week visiting a convicted sex offender because the world found out about it and told him it was bad. In his mind, it was fine. His story otherwise doesn't make sense. Imagine you found out a close friend or family member was a convicted sex offender. They abused children and admitted to abusing children. You had no idea, and you were horrified that you had this person in your house around your children multiple times. Would you then, after that person gets out of prison, go over to their home, spend a week in their company to tell them you no longer want anything to do with them? Or would you immediately cut contact with them because it should go without saying you don't want to spend time with someone who would abuse children? The very assertion that you would owe a person who abused children the respect of telling them you no longer want to be associated with them is ridiculous. But that is what Andrew was trying to state here, that he had enough respect for a convicted child predator that he had to tell them he wanted to break up with them in person.
What did he say when you told him that you were breaking up the friendship?
He was what I would describe as understanding. He didn't go into any great depth in the conversation about what I was doing, or what he was doing, except to say that he'd accepted whatever it was, a plea bargain. He'd served his time, and he was carrying on with his life. You see what I mean? And I said yes, but I'm afraid to say that's as may be. But with all the attendant scrutiny on me, then I don't think it is a wise thing to do.
This is now the second assertion Prince Andrew has made that he cut the relationship and friendship off because of, quote, the media scrutiny on him, unquote, which is to state that if the public didn't know about Jeffrey's crimes, he would have no issue hanging out, spending time with, and being close personal friends with a convicted sex offender. Again, Andrew thinks this interview was going very, very well.
Who advised you then that it was a good idea to go and break up the friendship? Did that come from the palace? Was Her Majesty the Queen involved?
No. That came from, so there were a number of people so some people from my staff, some people from friends and family I was talking to, and I took the decision that I had to show leadership, and I had to go and see him, and I had to tell him, that's it.
That was December of 2010.
Yep.
He threw a party to celebrate his release, and you were invited as the guest of honour.
Oh, in 2010, there certainly wasn't a party to celebrate his release in December, because it was a small dinner party. There were only 8 or 10 of us, I think, at the dinner. If there was a party, then I'd know nothing about that.
You were invited to that dinner as a guest of honour?
Well, I was there, so there was a dinner. I don't think it was quite as you might put it, but yeah, okay, I was there at a dinner, yeah.
I'm just trying to work this out, because you said you went to break up the relationship, and yet you stayed at that New York mansion several days. I'm wondering how long...
But I was doing a number of other things while I was there.
But you were staying at the house of a convicted sex offender.
It was a convenient place to stay. I've gone through this in my mind so many times. At the end of the day, with the benefit of all the hindsight that one could have, it was definitely the wrong thing to do. But at the time, I felt it was the honourable and right thing to do. And I admit fully that my judgment was probably coloured by my tendency to be too honourable, but that's just the way it is.
You don't need the benefit of hindsight to know that going to stay with a man who was accused of sex trafficking minors for a week is a bad idea. The very assertion that this is the only conclusion that one could come to with the benefit of hindsight is idiotic, to say the least. But to add that he only stayed with Epstein because he has a tendency to be too honorable is incredibly laughable.
Because during that time, those few days, witnesses say they saw many young girls coming and going at the time. There is video footage of Epstein accompanied by young girls. And you were there staying in his house, catching up with friends.
If they were, then I wasn't a party to any of that. I never saw them. I mean, you have to understand that his house, I described it more as almost as a railway station, if you know what I mean, in the sense that there were people coming in and out of that house all the time. What they were doing and why they were there, I had nothing to do with. So I'm afraid I can't make any comment on that, because I really don't know.
Another guest was John Brockman, the literary agent. Now, he described seeing you there getting a foot massage from a young Russian woman. Did that happen?
No.
You're absolutely sure, or you can't remember?
Absolutely sure.
So John Brockman's statement is false?
Well, I don't know Mr. Brockman, so I don't know what he's talking about.
But that definitely wasn't you getting a foot massage from a Russian girl in Jeffrey Epstein's house?
No.
It might seem a funny way to break off a friendship, a 4-day house party of sorts with a dinner. It's an odd way to break up a friendship.
It's a difficult way of putting it. That's a very stark way of putting it. Yes, you're absolutely right. But actually, the truth of it is that I actually only saw him for about the dinner party, the walk in the park, and probably passing in the passage.
This is likely false. Again, Andrew will only admit to what we have proof of, even if the scenario makes little sense. Since there were witnesses at the dinner party, he cannot deny that he was in attendance. However, he will deny that it was a party, choosing to say it was a dinner with 10 or so people. Since there are photos of him and Epstein in the park, he has to admit fault there. But it's incredibly unlikely that the two men didn't see each other more than just passing in the halls over the span of 4 days.
So let's go to that Central Park walk, which was snapped. Friends of yours suggest that Epstein wanted that photo taken. Perhaps he'd even set it up. Do you worry that you were being played?
Again, new information is coming out since his suicide has made us reappraise that walk in the park. We can't find any evidence, or my staff and my people and I can't find any evidence to suggest that that was what he was doing. I mean, you can look at it in so many different ways. The fact of the matter is that somebody very cleverly took that photograph. It wasn't, as far as I remember, nor do my security people remember anybody being present or close, because there were enough security around. I mean, there are even photographs of the security people are around in the photograph. So I mean, he could have done, but
I guess what I'm asking is, do you feel that you were part of Epstein's public rehabilitation?
Oh, no. Funnily enough, I don't. No. I mean, if he was doing, if that photograph was taken for that with that purpose in mind, then it doesn't equate to what actually happened.
So why wouldn't you announce this breakup when you got back? Why wouldn't you publicly explain what you'd done? Did you worry that he had something that could compromise you?
No. No.
Do you regret that trip?
Yes.
Do you regret the whole friendship with Epstein?
Now, still not, and the reason being is that the people that I met and the opportunities that I was given to learn, either by him or because of him, were actually very useful. He himself, not, as it were, as close as you might think. We weren't that close. So therefore, I mean, yes, I would go and stay in his house, but that was because of his girlfriend, not because of him.
Once again, given the opportunity to completely denounce a now deceased pedophile, Andrew refuses, saying instead he doesn't regret being friends with Epstein because it allowed him a lot of interesting opportunities that he otherwise would not have had. Which is a terrible thing to say when you're currently being accused of having sex with a 17-year-old working for Epstein. The only acceptable answer to this question would undoubtedly be, yes, I do regret that friendship, and I wish I never allowed that predator near my family.
Was that visit, December of 2010, the only time you saw him after he was convicted?
Yes.
Did you see him or speak to him again?
No, that was that. Funny enough, 2010 was it. That was it, because I went. Well, first of all, I wanted to make sure that if I was going to go and see him, I had to make sure that there was enough time between his release, because it wasn't something that I was going into in a hurry, but I had to go and see him. I had to go and see him. I had to
stay with him and stay in the house.
I could easily have gone and stayed somewhere else, but sheer convenience of being able to get a hold of the man was. I mean, he was in and out all over the place. So, getting him in one place for a period of time to actually have a long enough conversation to say, look, These are the reasons why I'm not going to. And that happened on the walk.
July of this year, Epstein was arrested on charges of sex trafficking and abusing dozens of underage girls. One of Epstein's accusers, Virginia Roberts, has made allegations against you. She says she met you in 2001. She says she dined with you, danced with you at Tramp nightclub in London. She went on to have sex with you in a house in Belgravia belonging to Ghislaine Maxwell, your friend. Your response?
I have no recollection of ever meeting this lady. None whatsoever.
You don't remember meeting her?
No.
She says she met you in 2001. She dined with you. She danced with you. You bought her drinks. You were in Tramp nightclub in London. And she went on to have sex with you in a house in Belgravia belonging to Ghislaine Maxwell.
Didn't happen.
Do you remember her?
No. I have no recollection of ever meeting her. I'm almost, in fact, I'm convinced that I was never in Tramps with her. There are a number of things that are wrong with that story. One of which is that I don't know where the bar is in Tramps. I don't drink. I don't think I've ever bought a drink in Tramp whenever I was there.
Do you remember dancing at Tramp?
No. That couldn't have happened because the date that is being suggested, I was at home with the children.
You know that you were at home with the children. Was it a memorable night?
On that particular day that we now understand is the date, which is the 10th of March, I was at home. I was with the children. I'd taken Beatrice to a Pizza Express in Woking for a party at I suppose sort of 4 or 5 in the afternoon. And then because the Duchess was away, we have a simple rule in the family that when one's away, the other one's there. I was on terminal leave at the time from the Royal Navy, so therefore I was at home.
Why would you remember that so specifically? Why would you remember a Pizza Express birthday and being at home?
Because going to Pizza Express in Woking is an unusual thing for me to do. A very unusual thing for me to do. I've only been to Woking a couple of times, and I remember it weirdly distinctly. As soon as somebody reminded me of it, I went, oh yes, I remember that. But I have no recollection of ever meeting or being in the company or the presence.
So you're absolutely sure that you're at home on the 10th of March.
Yeah.
She was very specific about that night. She described dancing with you and you profusely sweating, and that she went on to have bath, possibly.
There's a slight problem with the sweating because I have a peculiar medical condition, which is that I don't sweat, or I didn't sweat at the time, and that was, oh actually, yes, I didn't sweat at the time because I had suffered what I would describe as an overdose of adrenaline in the Falklands War when I was shot at, and I simply it was almost impossible for me to sweat, and it's only because I have done a number of things in the recent past that I'm starting to be able to do that again. So I'm afraid to say that there's a medical condition that says that I didn't do it, so therefore.
Not knowing where the bar in a club is, and simply stating that you weren't able to sweat, is not proof of innocence in this case. However, if he does have an alibi, it should have been relatively easy to check and confirm. His security for that night, the parents who chaperoned the birthday party at Pizza Express, and security cameras at the shop should all confirm his detailed account. But, as it were, nothing definitive has cleared his name.
Is it possible that you met Virginia Roberts, dined with her, danced with her in Tramp, had sex with her on another date?
No.
Do you remember meeting her at all?
No.
Do you know you didn't meet her, or do you just not remember meeting her?
No, I don't know if I've met her. But no, I have no recollection of meeting her.
Because she was very specific. She described the dance that you had together in Tramp. She described meeting you. She was a 17-year-old girl meeting a senior member of the royal family.
Never happened.
She provided a photo of the
Yes.
two of you together.
Yes,
Your arm was around her waist.
yes.
You've seen the photo.
I've seen the photograph.
How do you explain that?
I can't. Because I have absolutely no memory of that photograph ever being taken.
Do you recognise yourself in the photo?
Yeah, it's pretty difficult not to recognise yourself.
Your friend suggested that the photo is fake.
I think it's, from the investigations that we've done, you can't prove whether or not that photograph is faked or not, because it is a photograph of a photograph of a photograph. So it's very difficult to be able to prove it. But I don't remember that photograph ever being taken.
But it's possible that it was you with your
No,
arm around
that's
her waist.
me, but whether that's my hand or whether that's the position, but I have simply no recollection of a photograph ever being taken.
The world has now seen the photo that Virginia Roberts provided, taken by Epstein, we understand, in Ghislaine Maxwell's house.
Well, here's the problem. I've never seen Epstein with a camera in my life.
I think it was Virginia Roberts' camera. She said a little Kodak one that she lent to Epstein. He took a photo, and your arm is round her waist.
I don't remember that photograph ever being taken. I don't remember going upstairs in the house, because that photograph is taken upstairs. And I'm not entirely convinced that, I mean, that is what I would describe as me in that picture. But we can't be certain as to whether or not that's my hand on her, whatever it is, left side.
You think that...
Because I have no recollection of that photograph ever being taken.
So why would somebody have put in another hand? You think it is you next to her in the photo?
Oh, it's definitely me. I mean, that's a picture of me. It's not a picture of. I don't believe it's a picture of me in London, because when I go out in London, I wear a suit and a tie. That's what I would describe as, those are my travelling clothes if I'm going overseas. So I've got plenty of photographs of me dressed in those sorts of sort of kit, but not there.
Just to clarify, so you think that photo has been faked?
Nobody can prove whether or not that photograph has been doctored, but I don't recollect that photograph ever being taken.
And you don't recollect having your hand round her waist in Ghislaine Maxwell's house on any occasion, even if it was a different date?
I'm terribly sorry, but if I, as a member of the royal family, and I have a photograph taken, and I take very, very few photographs, I am not one to, as it were, hug, and public displays of affection are not something that I do. So that's the best explanation I can give you, and I'm afraid to say that I don't believe that photograph was taken in the way that has been suggested.
Why would people not believe that you were there?
I'm sorry, why would?
I'm just trying to understand. There's a photo inside Ghislaine Maxwell's house. Ghislaine herself is in the background. Why would people not believe that you were there with her that night?
Well, they might well wish to believe it, but the photograph is taken upstairs, and I don't think I ever went upstairs in Ghislaine's house.
This barely registers as a defense, and it's clearly ridiculous that Andrew believed that all he had to do to clear himself of any perceived wrongdoing was to say, "I don't think I ever went upstairs." When the journalist asked, why should the public believe this photo was fake, Andrew had the opportunity to talk about his years of service to the country, how he would never have abused a woman like Virginia, and how he is addressing the allegations head on, because he knows they aren't true. But instead, he insists that when he went to Ghislaine's home, he never went upstairs, as if the public should take him at his word.
You're sure of that?
Yeah, because the dining room and everything was on the ground floor. Was as you came in the hall. So I don't remember ever going up there. I'm at a loss to explain this particular photograph. If the original was ever produced, then perhaps we might be able to solve it. But I can't.
You can say categorically that you don't recall meeting Virginia Roberts, dining with her,
Yep.
dancing with her at Tramp, or
Yep.
going on to have sex with her
Yes.
in a bedroom in a house in Belgravia.
I can absolutely categorically tell you it never happened.
Do you recall any kind of sexual contact with Virginia Roberts then
None.
or any other time?
None whatsoever.
Because she said in a legal deposition,
Mm-hmm.
a legal court document in 2015, she had sex with you 3 times.
Yeah.
She is not confused about this. She said the first was in London when she was trafficked to you. The second was at Epstein's mansion in New York.
That is a date in April, I believe. Is that correct?
She said it was a month or so later.
Yeah. Well, I think that the date that we have for that shows that I was in Boston, or I was in New York the previous day, and I was at a dinner for the Outward Bound Trust in New York, and then I flew up to Boston the following day. And then on the day that she says that this occurred, they'd already left to go to the island before I got back from Boston. So I don't think that could have happened at all.
There was a witness there, Johanna Stolberg, who says that you did visit the house in that month.
I probably did. I don't think, on one of the weird things, I was staying with because of what I was doing, I was staying with the Consul General, which is further down the street on Fifth. So I wasn't staying there. I may have visited, but no, definitely no activity.
Because in a legal deposition, 2015, she said she had sex with you 3 times. Once in a London house when she was trafficked to you in Maxwell's house.
Yes.
Once in New York a month or so later at Epstein's mansion, and once on his private island in a group of 7 or 8 other girls.
No.
No to all of it?
All of it. Absolutely no to all of it.
Why would she be saying those things?
We wonder exactly the same, but I have no idea. Absolutely no idea.
She made these claims in a US deposition.
Mm-hmm.
Are you saying you don't believe her? She's lying?
That's a very difficult thing to answer, because I'm not in a position to know what she's trying to achieve, but I can tell you categorically, I don't remember meeting her at all. I do not remember a photograph being taken, and I've said consistently and frequently that we never had any sort of sexual contact whatever.
She spoke about you outside the court in August of this year.
Mm-hmm.
She said, I quote, "He knows exactly what he's done, and I hope he comes clean about it."
And the answer is nothing.
So if Virginia Roberts is watching this interview, what is your message to her?
I don't have a message for her, because I have to have a thick skin. If somebody's going to make those sorts of allegations, then I've just got to have a thick skin and get on with it. But they never happened.
For the record, is there any way you could have had sex with that young woman or any young woman trafficked by Jeffrey Epstein in any of his residences?
No. And without putting too fine a point on it, if you're a man, it is a positive act to have sex with somebody. You have to take some sort of positive action. And so therefore, if you try to forget, it's very difficult to try and forget positive action. And I do not remember anything. I've racked my brain and thinking, oh, well, when the allegations came out originally, I went, well, that's a bit strange, I don't remember this. And then I've been through it and through it and through it over and over and over again. And no, nothing. Never happened.
This was possibly the most damning statement out of everything that Andrew has said in the interview, claiming that when he first heard about the allegations, he had to ponder to himself because he couldn't quite remember if anything like that had occurred, makes it seem more to the general public. Not that something like this had never happened to him, but that something like this had happened to him with such frequency, he couldn't be sure about the details.
You're sure of that?
Yeah, because the dining room and everything was on the ground floor. It was as you came in the hall. So I don't remember ever going up there. I'm at a loss to explain this particular photograph. If the original was ever produced, then perhaps we might be able to solve it. But I can't.
You can say categorically that you don't recall meeting Virginia Roberts, dining with her,
Yep.
dancing with her at Tramp,
Yep.
or going on to have sex with her
Yes.
in a bedroom in a house in Belgravia.
I can absolutely categorically tell you it never happened.
Do you recall any kind of sexual contact with Virginia Roberts then
None.
or any other time?
None whatsoever.
Because she said in a legal deposition,
Mm-hmm.
a legal court document in 2015, she had sex with you 3 times.
Yeah.
She is not confused about this. She said the first was in London when she was trafficked to you. The second was at Epstein's mansion in New York.
That is a date in April, I believe. Is that correct?
She said it was a month or so later.
Yeah. Well, I think that the date that we have for that shows that I was in Boston, or I was in New York the previous day, and I was at a dinner for the Outward Bound Trust in New York, and then I flew up to Boston the following day. And then on the day that she says that this occurred, they'd already left to go to the island before I got back from Boston. So I don't think that could have happened at all.
There was a witness there, Johanna Stolberg, who says that you did visit the house in that month.
I probably did. I don't think on one of the weird things, I was staying with the because of what I was doing, I was staying with the Consul General, which is further down the street on Fifth. So I wasn't staying there. I may have visited, but no, definitely no activity.
Because in a legal deposition, 2015, she said she had sex with you 3 times. Once in a London house when she was trafficked to you in Maxwell's house.
Yes.
Once in New York a month or so later at Epstein's mansion, and once on his private island in a group of 7 or 8 other girls.
No.
No to all of it?
All of it. Absolutely no to all of it.
Why would she be saying those things?
We wonder exactly the same, but I have no idea. Absolutely no idea.
She made these claims in a US deposition.
Mm-hmm.
Are you saying you don't believe her? She's lying?
That's a very difficult thing to answer, because I'm not in a position to know what she's trying to achieve, but I can tell you categorically, I don't remember meeting her at all. I do not remember a photograph being taken, and I've said consistently and frequently that we never had any sort of sexual contact whatever.
She spoke about you outside the court in August of this year. Mm-hmm. She said, I quote, "He knows exactly what he's done, and I hope he comes clean about it."
And the answer is nothing.
So if Virginia Roberts is watching this interview, what is your message to her?
I don't have a message for her, because I have to have a thick skin. If somebody's going to make those sorts of allegations, then I've just got to have a thick skin and get on with it. But they never happened.
For the record, is there any way you could have had sex with that young woman or any young woman trafficked by Jeffrey Epstein in any of his residences?
No. And without putting too fine a point on it, if you're a man, it is a positive act to have sex with somebody. You have to take some sort of positive action. And so therefore, if you try to forget, it's very difficult to try and forget positive action. And I do not remember anything. I've racked my brain and thinking, oh, well, when the allegations came out originally, I went, well, that's a bit strange, I don't remember this. And then I've been through it and through it and through it over and over and over again. And no, nothing. Never happened.
Again, Andrew's habit of using as many words as possible to explain himself only serves to make him look worse. The question was basically, would you swear in a court of law that what you have said here today is the truth? The only acceptable answer would be yes, I am telling the truth. But to circumvent the question by saying that he would need to talk to lawyers if they recommended that he swear he was telling the truth only serves to make him look like an idiot.
Epstein's housekeeper, also in a Florida court legal deposition, said that you visited the Palm Beach residence around 4 times a year. You got a daily massage.
4 times a year?
That was what he said in a Florida court legal deposition.
No.
I'm just wondering, when you look back now, is there a chance that those massages might have been the services of someone who was being sexually exploited or trafficked by Epstein?
No. I don't think, no, definitely not. Definitely not. And I definitely did not visit his Palm Beach house 3 or 4 times a year. Absolutely not.
How many times would you say you visited?
In total, probably 4 times. In total, throughout the time that I knew him. In fact, probably that was the place that if you see what I mean, he was in the house more there than in other places that I was.
So that's where you'd find him.
But it was usually because I was going through and on somewhere else. So it was a day. That was it.
You said in your statement from the palace,
Yep.
At no time did I see, witness or suspect any suspicious behaviour.
Yep.
Virginia Roberts' legal team says you could not spend time around Epstein and not know what was going on. You could not spend time around Epstein and not know what was going on.
If you are somebody like me, then people behave in a subtly different way. You wouldn't, first of all, I'm not looking for it. That's the thing. If you're looking for it, then you might have suspected now with the benefit of a huge amount of hindsight and a huge amount of analysis, you look back and you go, well, was that really the way that it was, or was I looking at it the wrong way? But you don't go into these places, you don't go to stay with people looking for that.
You could not spend time around him. That was what they said. You could not spend time around him and not know.
Look, the other aspect of this is that I live in an institution at Buckingham Palace which has members of staff walking around all the time. And I don't wish to appear grand, but there were a lot of people who were walking around Jeffrey Epstein's house. As far as I was aware, they were staff, they were people that were working for him or doing things. I, as it were, I interacted with them, if you wanted to say good morning, good afternoon, but I didn't, if you see what I mean, interact with them in a way that was, you know, what are you doing here, why are you here, what's going on?
But you'd notice if there were hundreds of underage girls in Buckingham Palace,
God.
Wouldn't you?
But you would notice if there were hundreds of underage girls in Jeffrey's house. Wasn't there. Not when I was there. Now, he may have changed his behaviour patterns in order for that not to be obvious to me. So I don't know. I mean, this is, you're asking me to speculate on things that I just don't know about.
You seem utterly convinced you're telling the truth. Would you be willing to testify or give a statement under oath if you were asked?
Well, I'm like everybody else, and I would have to take all the legal advice that there was before I was to do that sort of thing. But if push came to shove and the legal advice was to do so, then I would be duty-bound to do so.
Because you've said there are many unanswered questions,
Yep.
Everyone affected wants closure. You would help to provide that closure?
If in the right circumstances, yes, I would, because I think there's just as much closure for me as there is for everybody else. And undoubtedly, some very strange and unpleasant activities have been going on. I'm afraid to say that I'm not the person who can shed light on it for a number of reasons, one of which is that I wasn't there long enough. I mean, if you go in for a day, 2 days at a time, it's quite easy, I'm led to believe, for those sorts of people to hide their activities for that period of time and then carry on when you're not there.
Virginia Roberts' lawyers, legal team, say that they've asked for a legal statement from you. There is an active FBI investigation now. Would you be willing to provide that?
Again, I'm bound by what my legal advisors tell me.
Epstein was found dead.
Yep.
In prison.
Yes.
In August of this year.
Yep.
What was your response on hearing that he'd died?
Shock.
Some people think that he didn't take his own life.
Well, there again, I'm not one to be able to answer that question. I believe that centres around something to do with a bone in his neck, as to whether or not, if you commit suicide, that bone breaks or something. But I'm afraid to say I'm not an expert. I have to take what the coroner says, and he has ruled that it was suicide. So
he's dead. His girlfriend, Ghislaine Maxwell, your old friend,
Yep.
was, victims say, complicit in his behaviour.
Well, that bit I can't help you with because I've no idea.
Do you think that she has questions to answer about her role in this?
Well, in the same way that I have questions to answer, in the sense of what was I doing, and as I say, that I was there to my mind, be honourable and say to him, look, you've been convicted. It would be incompatible for me to be seen with you. Unfortunately, somebody was standing around with a camera at the time and got a photograph of us. It's one of the very few photographs there are of us, but that was the case. If there are questions that Ghislaine has to answer, that's her problem. I'm afraid I'm not in a position to be able to comment one way or the other.
When was your last contact with her?
It was earlier this year, funny enough, in the summer, in the spring, summer.
About what?
She was here doing some rally.
So even though he had by then been arrested and was facing charges of sex trafficking?
No. This was early spring, I think. It was long, because when was he arrested?
July.
No, it was before July.
And that was the last time?
Yeah.
Did you discuss Epstein at all then?
No, actually, funnily enough, no, not at all. There wasn't anything to discuss about him because he wasn't in the news. It wasn't, it was just, we'd moved on.
I want to talk about moving on now.
Oh, yeah, right, okay.
Epstein is dead.
Yes.
The women are now being heard.
Quite rightly.
How do you move on from this?
Well, it's an interesting way of putting it. I'm carrying on with what I do. I have a number of things that I have been doing since 2011. They're pretty well organised, pretty successful, and so I'm carrying on and trying to improve those things that I'm already doing.
I wonder what effect all this has had on your close family. You've got daughters of your own.
It has been what I would describe as a constant sore in the family. We all knew him. And I think that if we have a conversation about it, we're all left with the same thing of what on earth happened? Well, how did he get to where he was? What did he do? How did he do it? And so it's just a constant sort of gnaw. I mean, this first came out in 2011, and it was a surprise to all of us because the photographs were published at a separate time to when I was there, and there was sort of a question about what was going on, and as a family we discussed it. And then in 2015, when the allegations were made in the deposition, there was a sort of this is the immediate family, not the wider family. The wider family couldn't be more supportive. But the immediate family, it was, well, what's all this about? And we all just, we're at a loss. So it's just...
Has the episode been damaging to the royal family, to Her Majesty the Queen?
I don't believe it's been damaging to the Queen at all. Has to me. And it's been a constant drip, if you see what I mean, in the background that people want to know. If I was in a position to be able to answer all these questions in a way that gave sensible answers, other than the ones that I've given that gave closure, then I'd love it. But I'm afraid I can't. I'm just not in a position to do so because I'm just as much in the dark as many people.
How do you reconnect with the public then now?
But exactly what I'm doing, which is to use and to continue to work with pitch, to continue to work with idea and the things that I believe strongly in. I'm not somebody who does things in competition with people. Oddly, I do things in collaboration with people. So I want people to work together to come to, as it were, a solution to a bigger problem. And so we've got a number of people working together, particularly in the education field, particularly and also in areas of government and what they are doing, so that we're bringing everybody together, so that we're all pushing in the same direction. An idea now does that. We've been going properly now for 2 years. We've got 3.5 million people who've got a badge. We've got 500,000 or just over 500,000 young people who are using the service, and I'm trying to think what else we've got, but it's well, it's designed for 7 to 14-year-olds in the United Kingdom, and it turns out it's done from 5 to 95 around the world. So it's being done in 100 countries now. So we're slightly on the catch-up for this one.
I know we have to bring this to a close because we're running out of time. You've faced questions today on a very, very raw subject. There has never been an interview like this before. I wonder what that tells us about the way the royal family now confronts these difficult situations. Has there been a sea change?
I think that the problem that we face in the 21st century is social media. There is a whole range of things that you face now that you didn't face 25 years ago because it was just the print media. And I think that to some extent there is a thick skin that you have to have. And again, I'm not a confrontationalist myself. I would prefer to be able to, as it were, resolve things in a way that is sensible. And so choosing to, as it were, get out there and talk about these things, it's almost a mental health issue to some extent for me, in the sense that it's been nagging at my mind for a great many years. I know that I made the wrong judgment and I made the wrong decision, but I made the wrong decision and the wrong judgment, I believe, fundamentally for the right reasons, which is to say to somebody, I'm not going to see you again. And in fact, from that day forth, I was never in contact with him. The subsequent allegations are what I would describe as surprising, shocking, and a distraction. But that's, I mean, there are all sorts of things that are on the internet and out there in the public domain that we just sort of go, well, yeah, but I'm afraid this is, it just never happened.
You've talked about a thick skin.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if you have any sense now of guilt, regret, or shame about any of your behaviour and your friendship with Epstein?
As far as Mr. Epstein is concerned, it was the wrong decision to go and see him in 2010. As far as my association with him was concerned, it had some seriously beneficial outcomes in areas that have nothing to do with what I would describe as what we're talking about today. On balance, could I have avoided ever meeting him? Probably not, and that's because of my friendship with Ghislaine. It was inevitable that we would have come across each other. Do I regret the fact that he has quite obviously conducted himself in a manner unbecoming? Yes. Unbecoming?
He was a sex offender.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm being polite, in the sense that he was a sex offender. But no. Was I right in having him as a friend? At the time, and bearing in mind this was some years before he was accused of being a sex offender, I don't think there was anything wrong then. The problem was the fact that once he had been convicted,
you stayed with him.
I stayed with him, and that's the bit that as it were, I kick myself for on a daily basis, because it was not something that was becoming of a member of the royal family, and we try and uphold the highest standards and practices, and I let the side down. Simple as that.
This interview has been exceptionally rare. You might not speak on this subject again. Is there anything you feel has been left unsaid that you would like to say now?
No, I don't think so. I think you've probably dragged out most of what is required, and I'm truly grateful for the opportunity that you've given me to be able to discuss this with you.
Your Royal Highness, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.
The interview truly could not have gone worse. On multiple occasions, Andrew made it a point to defend Epstein, saying he didn't regret meeting him or being his friend, and that he was an extraordinary man. Following the release, the general public was horrified. The Guardian summed up the interview stating, "It was an exchange that summed up a grotesque mismatch between the Duke of York's language and demeanor and the gravity of the allegations which continued to surround him, between the obtuse self-absorption of a prince and what we know of the appalling sexual exploitation of teenage girls by his friend." Mere days after, Buckingham Palace announced that Prince Andrew would be suspending his public duties for the foreseeable future, with many analysts going so far as to state that his reputation was damaged beyond repair. However, despite the suspension of royal duties, the royal family continued to pay for Andrew's security, noting that in the wake of the scandal, there had been threats made on his life. The cost of security was estimated to be between $300,000 to $3 million. In response, Andrew would hire a crisis firm who specializes in repairing damaged reputations. However, it seems that they were no help. He was contacted by American law enforcement and asked to speak to them regarding his relationship and affiliation with Ghislaine and Epstein. However, he refused to meet with them, fearing that he would be arrested and extradited to the U.S. And while it seemed that Andrew's reputation couldn't fall any further, in 2021, Virginia Giuffre sued him in the Federal District Court for the Southern District of New York, accusing him of sexual assault and intentional infliction of emotional distress. She filed the suit before the statute of limitations ran out, stating that 20 years ago, Prince Andrew's wealth, power, position, and connections enabled him to abuse a frightened, vulnerable child with no one there to protect her. It is long past the time for him to be held to account. Andrew and his lawyers denied the claims, stating that he had never met or assaulted Virginia. However, the evidence spoke for itself. In February 2022, the matter was settled, with Prince Andrew paying an undisclosed sum to the charity of Virginia's choice. Today, Prince Andrew is still a free man, and seemingly has been working his way back into the royal family, making multiple public appearances as of late. Whether or not he will be allowed back remains to be seen, but hopefully he isn't able to hurt anyone anymore. Thank you for watching this video. If there is a case you would like to see me cover, please leave a comment or email me at dreading.official@gmail.com.